From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Amarachi Ubani.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, releases guidelines for elections during COVID-19 pandemic, prepares for polls in Edo and Ondo states. The federal government evacuates 69 stranded Nigerians, including trafficked women, from Lebanon as part of efforts to contain spread of COVID-19. Tonight, we beam the searchlight on what it takes to get a COVID-19 vaccine from Nigeria as the global search for a cure continues. And the World Health Organization announces temporary suspension of its solidarity trial on the use of hydroxychloroquine for treatment of COVID-19 patients. Plus business, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later from our studios in London.
On business news tonight, ICT sector leads economic growth in first quarter of 2020 as COVID-19 spendings revitalize the health sector.
On sports news tonight, Lyon Football Club president calls on French authorities to reconsider their decision to end the football season early.
And from the nation's capital, Muslim faithful celebrate Id-el-Fitri holiday at home as a result of COVID-19 pandemic restrictions.
In spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is going ahead to hold elections in some states. Towards this end, the electoral umpire has released guidelines for the conduct of the governorship polls in Edo and Ondo states, holding on September 19th and October 10th this year. Apart from the governorship polls, the electoral umpire has also fixed dates for the 4 postponed by-elections in Bayelsa, Imo, and Plateau states. In this report, our political correspondent, Showoki Maloye, gives us some insight into the provisions of the new guidelines.
Crowded polling units, clusters, the sort of queues at elections you may no longer see. There is a new normal for election conduct in Nigeria, and this is because of the coronavirus disease. Brace up, everyone, for some of these changes. Before you are allowed to vote, you must wear a face mask. Elections will now start at 8:30 a.m. and close at 2:30 p.m., a 30-minute adjustment. Officials will not only wear their usual gears, but will have to wear personal protective equipment. The Commission will conduct by-elections to try out some of these measures newly announced before going into the Edo and Ondo governorship elections.
The policy is without any face mask, you cannot vote in this election.
INEC believes it is a new way of doing things and there might be some needed adjustments we must anticipate, especially for political parties.
We will be there to monitor the party primaries. And when they go wrong, or when they are doing things that are not in conformity with the established protocols by the health authorities, we will gladly draw their attention to it and get them to comply with some of those protocols and some of those rules and regulations.
No doubt the novel coronavirus disease has changed the way we live our lives. Democracy and politics are not left out, but it appears it might have awakened a new thinking in us. Showoki Maloye, Channels Television News.
We'll have more of the new INEC guidelines later in the bulletin. We'll be joined by Dr. Osini Abdul to discuss its provisions. In the meantime, 69 Nigerians comprising 50 trafficked girls and 19 other stranded citizens evacuated from Lebanon have arrived in the country. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Jeffo Nyama, announced this on his Twitter handle today. He explains that the evacuations of Nigerians was made possible through the support of the Lebanese government and the Lebanese community in Nigeria, and that the evacuees have arrived safely. He expresses gratitude to the Lebanese ambassador to Nigeria and the Nigerian ambassador to Lebanon for the roles they played in facilitating the evacuations. The evacuees are expected to observe the mandatory 14-day isolation period to determine their COVID-19 status. And in Anambra State, the battle to keep COVID-19 out appears to be assuming a new dimension, with the state government erecting an iron gate at the Onitsha end of the River Niger Bridge over the weekend. With confirmed cases in Anambra hitting 8, all with travel history, Governor Willie Obiano had directed drastic steps to be taken to curb the mass movement of people into the state. The erection and closure of the gate at the bridgehead took everyone by surprise, resulting in a gridlock at the Asaba end of the bridge in Delta State.
Long lines of articulated vehicles and lorries as far as the eyes can see from around Uga Junction to the bridgehead in Onitsha. At the Delta end of the Niger Bridge, it's the same story. Vehicles on standstill and passengers stranded.
We don't see what they are doing. Okay, they say social difference, distance. But take a look. What kind of social distance are we here now? We are talking about COVID-19. It's already here with us. They should free the road. Let every person go.
Other states is not like this. Even last I went to North Nasarawa, when it's 6 o'clock in the morning, they will just open the gate, everybody going. But here now they see closing the gate against people.
But what's the reason for this gridlock? A metal barricade erected by the Anambra State government to check the influx of people and also contain the spread of the coronavirus in the state.
The Delta State counterparts, we discuss with them. We'll have time to release vehicles from Anambra State. We'll have time they release their own, and we'll do it in segments.
Finally, the Iron Gate is opened. The Anambra and Delta State governments have agreed to regulate the movement of vehicles and passengers into both states. That will not stop the Anambra State enforcement officials from inspecting vehicles carrying essential commodities to ensure that there are no people being smuggled in.
Like if other states should emulate the governor of Anambra State for what he's doing and for the fact that this central gate has been locked up.
We have to protect our state because this coronavirus is too dangerous.
And I carry this group from Lagos State to Anambra State. And what they are doing here is proper checking, and everything is going well.
More measures, however, are advised at the bridgehead boundary, such as wearing face masks and social distancing to preventive protocols that are absent in the area.
While some states strive to limit the spread of COVID-19, 32 patients have been discharged from the isolation center in Jigawa after testing negative twice for the virus. This brings the total number of discharged COVID-19 patients to 143 in the state, while 4 fatalities have been recorded. The Commissioner for Health, Dr. Abba Zakari, who announced this to journalists at the NYSC camp in Dutse, adds that the lockdown will be lifted on 3 local councils.
We've discharged 32 inpatients yesterday, and aside that also, that's bringing to total about 143 patients discharged from our isolation and treatment center. And aside that also, you remember there are some local governments that are under lockdown. Burnum Kudu, Gwaram, and Gumel are under lockdown. We've done all our contact tracings, and we've taken all our samples, and those that are supposed to be in isolation are already in isolation. So we are lifting the lockdown in these 3 local government areas: in Gumel, in Burnunkudu, and in Gwaram, with immediate effects. And we hope that we will not be in another situation that will let us impose another lockdown on these local governments again.
For more on the new policy on elections issued by INEC to conform with the current COVID-19 pandemic, I'll be joined on the news at 10 by an election observer and former country director of Action Aid, Dr. Oseni Abdul, who joins us from our Abuja studio. He joins us via Skype. Dr. Abdul, thank you for joining us on the news at 10. What are your reactions to the guidelines announced by INEC, and what does that mean for our electoral process?
Thank you very much for having me. I'm currently the country director of Plan International and as well the chair of the board of IAGA Africa. For me, my reaction very quickly is just to say that INEC was coming out very clearly to bring out a business continuity plan. So the policy guideline is a business continuity plan. The business of INEC is to conduct elections, and that these elections will be conducted in a very difficult context. The world is currently faced by a massive crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. It therefore means that businesses cannot stop because the COVID-19 pandemic is ravaging the world. It therefore means INEC cannot stop conducting elections because of COVID-19. So it has to conduct elections, but these elections must be conducted safely in a manner that the electoral process is not contributing to the escalation of the already existing crisis. So one, INEC wants to meet its constitutional mandate as an election management body, but it wants to do that by also ensuring that people are not exposed to the ravaging character of the COVID-19 situation. And that is what this policy is all about.
And you have observed elections in Nigeria. What are your fears then about the implementation of some of these guidelines? Good intentions, I must add, but are they adequate enough for us to risk going to the polls during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. Sometimes plans are really, really very different from the executions of the plan. I think from what INEC have in terms of the policy design, what they have in place is to a very large extent good enough, but we expect that there will be gradual improvement of it as INEC continues to learn in its implementation process. But the most important part of it is the fact that the INEC electoral officials and the citizens who will be out to vote and their political parties will need to be properly educated on each element of this policy guideline that has been issued out, particularly the guidelines that are associated with voter accreditation and the voting process, so that all the clear hygiene regime or regiment that has been put in place, that has been designed to be conducted, the INEC must ensure that people are properly educated to follow these guidelines. Because we have seen that even in other cases where guidelines around spacing, guidelines around basic hygiene, use of hand washing processes and all these issues becomes a big challenge. If we have seen that in our banks, we've seen that in our markets and all those things. So INEC has to prepare and ensure that people are properly educated on these. Not just INEC, civil society organizations, political parties, everyone must support this process for it to be successful.
I certainly agree, but going forward, in terms of digitizing our elections, you think we've learned any lessons so far?
We did learn a lesson, and I think that INEC had made a very gradual, but rather a very relatively slow process of digitizing elections. And if you look at our last, particularly if you look at the general election, the last 3 general elections have shown some little element of the digitizing elections, but we haven't gone on whole swap to actually do this. And I think this is what is coming with this policy guideline, where INEC is making clear that we may need some strong legislation to actually be able to support that. So what you have in this guideline or the policy framework is both the immediate, the medium term, and the long-term perspective to these issues. And INEC was clear, we need to digitize. And that's what we are all doing. I'm here in a discussion with you, ordinarily without COVID-19, I probably would be in the studio doing this. It's a new reality. People are working from home. So INEC must shape up to actually be able to effectively respond to the COVID-19 situation. And like we are all saying, the world is totally a different world today. And therefore, and one of the major drivers of the new world is the digital system. So the digital framework is what everyone is trying to embrace. And INEC is actually, as it is now, it's an imperative. That it's either you do that or you are not able to conduct elections at all.
Indeed, Dr. Oseni Abdul, appreciate your thoughts on this issue, and thanks for coming on the News at 10.
Thank you very much for having me.
In part two, after the break, search for COVID-19 vaccine continues globally. We'll open discussions on what it takes to get a vaccine from Nigeria. We'll be joined on the News at 10 by a professor of toxicology, chemistry, and microbiology, Professor Onyi Wagbara. Join us again. Welcome back. If it has joined us, you're watching the News at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, releases guidelines for elections during COVID-19 pandemic, prepares for elections in Edo and Ondo states. The federal government evacuates 69 stranded Nigerians from Lebanon as part of efforts to contain spread of COVID-19. Tonight, we beam the searchlight on what it takes to get a COVID-19 vaccine from Nigeria as the global search for a cure continues. And the World Health Organization announces temporary suspension of its solidarity trial on use of hydroxychloroquine for treatment of COVID-19 patients. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. As many people around the world would love to return to their normal lives the way they knew it before COVID-19, there are no scientifically and ethically backed vaccines for the virus yet. On the brighter side, there is a global collaborative effort on vaccine development, and in Nigeria, several therapeutics are in the works, with 5 states participating in a WHO solidarity trial. In this next report, our correspondent Dari Idowu looks at the key steps towards developing a safe and effective vaccine and how close we are.
All eyes on the medical community as they race against time to find potential treatments and vaccines for COVID-19. And as many would want an accelerated pace in this effort, the World Health Organization says there are no shortcuts to efficacy.
We are currently mapping the vaccine candidates that are underway, that are in development. There's more than 120 vaccine candidates, and I'm sure there's far more than even we're mapping. Some of these are in clinical evaluation, which means they're being tested in people, and some are in preclinical evaluation.
Exploratory, preclinical, clinical development, regulatory approval, manufacturing, and quality control. This, in summary, describes the stages, but the timelines not definitive.
It will interest you to know that people have put in resources to developing vaccines for both SARS of 17 years ago and MERS of 8 years ago, and still, till now, there isn't any categorical effective vaccine for those 2 coronavirus.
The medications must be safe for use with proper dosage determined. Experts say the journey to this guaranteed safety is rigorous and thorough.
To develop a vaccine is a lot of work. it can last years. So for the COVID, I believe the earliest we can see a COVID vaccine is maybe a year to a year and a half. Right now, we don't have any COVID vaccine in Nigeria. We have people that have already made claims that they have one herbal medicine or the other for COVID. One person claimed that he has a COVID vaccine and it's herbal based, but it's difficult enough to make vaccines from virus, not to talk of from plants.
In the past months, a familiar name, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, have been mentioned, especially by President Donald Trump. Another familiar name has popped up in the search for a homegrown solution. Former Electoral Commission Chairman and Professor of Pharmacognosy, Professor Morris Iwu, says he might have a cure for COVID-19.
What happens with viruses, by nature, they are not killed as such. What you do is to stop the replication of the virus, and then the body takes over. So when the laboratory studies, this compound at very, very low doses, we're able to reduce the replication of the virus.
To date, there are no specific vaccines for COVID-19, but different treatment options are under investigation. While the world waits for an acceptable medication or vaccine, for now, taking precautions seem like the most reliable option available for all. Dari Ido, Channels Television News.
Let's talk some more now on the search for a COVID-19 cure. We've been joined on the news at 10 by a professor of toxicology, chemistry and microbiology from the Nile University in Abuja, Professor Onyi Mwabara. He joins us from our studio in Abuja. Professor Mwabara, thank you for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you for having me, Amarachi.
The toxicity of chloroquine has been a major controversy, and this particular drug has been with us for so many years. Can you tell us what has changed between then and now?
Well, when you talk about treatment with either chloroquine or hydrochloroquine treatment for COVID-19, there are health implications or side effects. Those of us that study toxicology, we find out that there are some side effects associated with some of these treatment regimen. However, to people that have immunocompromised system, those with heart conditions, it's not one size fits all. You cannot just treat someone that is between the ages of 40 or 50 and get a very positive result, and someone that is in their late 70s or early 80s, the immune system tends to decrease as we get older. So the side effect associated with hydroxychloroquine and other regimen cannot be ignored. And that is why if you hear this evening, World Health Organization has stopped this treatment of COVID-19 with hydroxychloroquine, because there are some health implications for those that have unstable immune system. And we cannot just say that, well, if it works in Nigeria, definitely it's going to work for somebody in Europe or in the Americas. So it's not so. So the side effect ranges from heart conditions, for those that have heart conditions, to those that have immunocompromised system. And if you look at the recovery rate, for those that have been treated with this regimen of hydrochloroquine and other drugs associated for the treatment of COVID-19, there are some challenges, and we cannot ignore that. And I tell people this: if it is working for us in Nigeria, what are the data that are out there that can substantiate this recovery rate? And also, those that are in other climes, how effective is this drug? What are the side effects associated with it? So we have to be very, very careful. It's not one size fits all.
Indeed, and I do understand that there are a concoction of drugs that are being used to treat coronavirus, depending on the needs of the patients. We're talking about the vaccine for the virus. From your experience, and with so many scientists around the world working on vaccines. How soon do you think we're likely to have one or even develop a cure here in Nigeria?
Vaccine production is not something that happens overnight. Yes, we're in a desperate time. We are running against time. And that's why there's an urgent need to come up with vaccine. What is vaccine? It's just to expose the body to a weaker virus that the body recognizes as an antigen and develop antibody against that antigen. And this is something that is done a period of about 2 to 5 years. It just don't happen overnight. You have to make sure that the gene of these viruses that are being cloned, and when they're administered to humans, then the human body can respond by producing antibody against this antigen. So it's not something that will happen overnight. And I hear people clamoring that they have a solution to the vaccine production. In the production of medicine or drugs, it can last out about 10 years. But desperate times calls for desperate situation. All hands must be on deck. Globally, it's not something that an individual country or a few researchers can embark on. There are researchers globally now that are working on this virus to make sure that human lives are saved by coming up with a vaccine that can help prevent humans. When we're exposed to this virus in the future, we can be able to survive. So vaccine production, on the average, takes about 3 to 5 years. So we are not looking at any time in the next 1 year to come up with a vaccine that we can be able to use to protect people from this virus. The issue of safety has to come to place.
Right.
Well, if you expose someone to a weaker virus, to make sure that the body of this individual can withstand and produce antibodies against the virus, how do you go about ascertaining that? It doesn't happen overnight. So we're looking at a period of about 24 months to 36 months at the average.
Professor Onyiwa, where are your thoughts? Highly appreciated here on the News at 10. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
When the News at 10 returns, we have more updates on COVID-19. Plus, information communication technology sector leads economic growth in the first quarter of 2020 as COVID-19 spendings revitalize health sector GDP. That's on Business News. Join us again. Welcome back, and we're back in Abuja, where Ibrahim Adra is standing by with more on the News at 10. Hi, Ibrahim.
Hi, very good to see you, Amarachi. Let's start off from Bauchi State, where 2 babies aged 4 and 11 months, as well as a 15-year-old, are among newly discharged COVID-19 patients from isolation centers. All but one of the 27 health workers infected with the virus have also recovered and been discharged. The Commissioner of Health, Dr. Aliyu Megoro, told Channels Television that the state has recorded 80% success rate in case management. Dr. Megoro also confirms that the ratio of men to women infection is 70 to 30, while the health team is managing the case of a pregnant woman due for delivery. 300 inmates of correctional centers in Kano State capital have regained their freedom as part of activities marking this year's Id-el-Fitri. At the Gwarondutse prison facility, Governor Abdullahi Ganduje explained that the gesture is part of the ongoing decongestion exercise directed by President Muhammadu Buhari. Correspondent Idris Jibrin reports.
In these times of the COVID-19 pandemic, keeping a large number of people together in a confined space, like in correctional centers, is a recipe for disaster. This is one of the concerns of Governor Abdullahi Ganduje as he continues to visit correctional centers across Kano State as part of efforts to stop further spread of the COVID-19.
Ibrahim Ayuba, Hafiz Ahmad.
Over the last 2 months, the state has released 603 inmates following a presidential directive to decongest correctional centers.
You should be born again. You should behave well. You should know that you have to be a good student. Good students of Nigeria and good students of Kano State. Also, you should know that one of the reasons why you have been released today is because of the pandemic disease and infectious disease, coronavirus.
His Excellency Cardinal Islam.
The controller of the State Prison Service acknowledges the governor's donation of a 30-hectare piece of land for the construction of a modern correctional center.
This morning is going to release 145 for state pardon and 149 for presidential pardon, making 294. We've equally received palliatives, COVID-19 palliatives from His Excellency.
Meanwhile, all the released inmates have been given the sum of 5,000 naira each as transport fare back to their homes, with the instruction that they use their newfound freedom for the good of society. Idris Jubrin, Channels Television News.
Indeed, it's an uncommon Id-el-Fitri celebration in Abuja, the nation's capital, and several northern states, as some of the states are observing varying degrees of lockdown to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Muslim faithful are celebrating Id-el-Fitri in their homes without the usual fanfare, and festivals such as the Durbar, which is celebrated in many northern states, have also been cancelled.
This is what this year's Id-el-Fitri celebration looks like in the Federal Capital Territory. Although the total lockdown because of COVID-19 has been eased, mosques have remained shut, recreation centers are under lock and key, and many streets in the city center are almost empty. Many residents are celebrating Id-el-Fitri in their homes. But some merrygoers attempting to visit the Millennium Park are turned away by security personnel. In Kano State, major fun spots like the zoo and amusement parks are also locked up. The Durbar Festival, which takes place a day after Id-el-Fitri, has been cancelled because of a lockdown which the government imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19. It's a similar scenario in Katsina State. The traditional Durbar Festival has also been cancelled because of the pandemic, and the old state government house, which is the venue of the festival, is under lock and key.
We have attended Id-el-Fitr, myself and my family, but unfortunately the usual Salah festivities, the Hawan Salah that we usually see in Katsina, could not be held because of that.
Well, let's return to Amarachi in our Lagos studios for more update on COVID-19 and other stories.
Thanks, Ibrahim. President Muhammadu Buhari has called for peace on the continent as a prerequisite for sustainable growth and development. The president conveyed this in a message to African leaders to mark the Africa Day 2020, commemorated by the Africa Union Commission in collaboration with the World Health Organization. A statement from his spokesperson, Mr. Garba Shehu, quotes President Buhari as saying that Africa has given the world new hope by choosing the theme, Silencing the Guns, in the context of the COVID-19 for this year's Africa Day. The president emphasized the inseparable connection between peace and development, underscoring the need for African leaders to ensure that every effort is made to ensure the success of silencing the guns on the continent. Africa Day is observed annually on May 25th to commemorate the founding of the Organization of African Unity, the precursor to the African Union in 1963. The Niger Delta Development Commission has kicked off the distribution of medical supplies and relief materials across the Niger Delta region, along with public enlightenment campaigns on containing the spread of COVID-19. During the flag-off ceremony at the NDDC warehouse in Port Harcourt, Rivers State, the Commission's acting managing director, Professor Kemebra Dikumo Ponde, lamented the poor state of health facilities in the country. He notes that this is specifically the major constraint in the fight against COVID-19 in many states of the Niger Delta. Professor Ponde stressed that the Commission is always ready to offer support in quality healthcare.
The bulk of this package is actually medicals, equipment that will be sent to beef up the challenges of this coronavirus thing. The thing is spreading, whether we like it or not. Even in River State, we're surprised that the number has gotten to the number above 50. And in some states, over 1,000. So there'll be a point at which even the medical equipment present in the different states will no longer be possible. So that's part of this intervention. The other part includes the food items, which will be distributed to the different states. And we want to plead, as we said, during the inauguration of the committee that has done a very wonderful work, developing a template for equitable distribution to make sure that this thing gets to those who really need it.
Business Music's next. Here's Kayode Okikiolu.
Well, thank you, Amarachi, and you're welcome to Business News. Let's start off with Nigeria's gross domestic product, which stood at 1.87% in the first quarter of 2020. And that's according to the latest economic data released by the National Bureau of Statistics. This represents a minus 0.68% slow growth when compared with the fourth quarter of 2019, which was 2.55%. Year on year, the economy also slowed by minus 0.23 percentage points when compared to Q1 2019. Meanwhile, the health sector rebounded to 1.06%, up from minus 0.56% recorded in the last quarter of 2019 and 0.16% recorded year on year. This is attributed to the early actions of government and private sector in tackling COVID-19 through multi-billion-dollar spendings. May the 25th of every year is dedicated by Africans around the world to commemorate the foundation of the Organization of Africa's Unity. Well, to mark this year's Africa Day celebration, the United Bank for Africa UBA brought together global leaders to discuss Africa's response to COVID-19, growth, jobs, and sustainable development amongst a global pandemic via virtual meeting, which was tagged UBA Africa Day Conversations 2020.
Welcome to UBA Africa Day Conversations 2020.
That announcement introduced the second edition of the symposium organized annually by the United Bank for Africa to celebrate Africa Day. The virtual meeting brought together global leaders to discuss the way forward for Africa, a continent facing a myriad of daunting challenges.
In this session, we will be defining Africa's response to COVID-19.
Moderating this year's edition of UBA's Africa Day Conversations is the chairman, United Bank for Africa, and founder of the Tony Elumelu Foundation, Mr. Tony Elumelu, who introduced discussions about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic and the response by various countries.
For us here in Liberia, our government, due to our government bilateral relationship and position, has allowed our government to mediate between banks, businesses, and other partners.
We have been able to release $25 million to all member states. Right now, we are still working together if we can release another $189.5 million to all members of the OACPS.
Africa, no doubt, will require a huge stimulus package to manage the impact of the pandemic. Healthy partnerships will be necessary.
I do think there is more that the United States can and should be doing, both on our own and in partnership with many other nations.
We need partnerships between governments, between the private sector, communities, but also the international community. And I thank Senator Coons also for, in a sense, highlighting the importance of international solidarity.
We need those private-public partnerships, those multi-stakeholder cooperations where we support youth innovative youth to build, to engage in innovations, in entrepreneurship, to build markets. We need to do that much earlier than we used in the past.
What should the priority of governments across Africa be?
I think the priority of our governments should be to make sure that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement gets implemented without delay.
Africa Day is not just a day to celebrate the continent's decolonization. It is also a day of sober reflection on how African countries can consolidate peace and democracy and work together for better development. The United Bank for Africa is determined to contribute its own quota to ensure the narrative is changed.
Well, thank you for watching Business News Tonight. I am Kayode Kikyolu. It's back to Amarachi.
Thanks, Kayode. Still ahead of the news at 10, World Health Organization announces temporary suspension of its solidarity trial on use of hydroxychloroquine for treatment of COVID-19 patients. We have this and more from our London studio and around the world in 5. Stay with us. Welcome back. The World Health Organization has suspended testing the malaria drug hydroxychloroquine in COVID-19 patients due to safety concerns. The drug had been touted by U.S. Presidents Donald Trump and others as a possible treatment for the disease caused by the novel coronavirus, with the U.S. president admitting he has been taking the drug. The WHO had previously recommended against using hydroxychloroquine to treat or prevent malaria except as part of clinical trials. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news and around the world in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. Supporters of the Brazilian president Jair Bolsonaro have defied the coronavirus lockdown and taken to the streets to call for an end to restrictions and the resumption of economic activities. Brazil currently has the second highest number of coronavirus cases in the world. In the capital, Brasilia, Bolsonaro was seen greeting anti-lockdown protesters, posing for photos and hugging a young girl. The far-right president has been widely criticised in his country and abroad for his handling of the pandemic and is at the centre of a deepening political crisis, with his name plummeting in the approval ratings. In response to the worsening pandemic in Brazil, the US administration on Sunday prohibited foreigners from travelling to the United States if they had been in Brazil in the past 2 weeks.
Doing a fantastic job, a great job.
China's foreign ministry in Hong Kong says some actions during last year's pro-democracy protests were terrorist in nature and have claimed troublemakers colluded with foreign forces. These remarks come after intense protests in the past weeks against the newly proposed national security legislation in Hong Kong. The new law could allow Chinese intelligence agencies to set up bases, and according to pro-democracy activists, it would limit the Hong Kongers' rights and freedoms. Burundi's ruling party candidate, the retired Army General Evariste Ndayishimiye, has won the presidential election with 68.72% of the votes. The result was announced by the Burundi Electoral Commission after accusations of rigging by the opposition leader, Agathon Rwasa. The vote was preceded by political violence, including the arrest, torture and murder of opposition activists. That's according to local rights groups. Rwasa declared on Sunday he would take his complaints to the Constitutional Court. Spanish authorities have started to lift more of the lockdown measures in the country's 2 main cities, Barcelona and the capital, Madrid. Restaurants and bars opened up their terraces, partially ending some of the strictest lockdown measures in Europe. Spain urged foreign tourists to return from July. The Spanish economy heavily relies on summer tourism, which accounts for more than 12% of Spain's economic output. As in Spain, Greece also aims to reopen its tourism economy before the beginning of the summer season. Local authorities have allowed the reopening of coffee shops, restaurants, bars and travel to the islands. They were cut off since the lockdown was enforced more than 2 months ago. Year-round hotels and campsites will all open on June the 1st, while on June the 15th, all seasonal hotels will be able to open and international flights will be permitted to Athens International Airport.
Ich verkünde nunmehr im Namen des Volkes.
The highest civil court in Germany has ruled that Volkswagen must pay compensation to a motorist who had bought one of its vehicles fitted with the emissions cheating software. The ruling sets a benchmark for about 60,000 other cases in Germany and possibly around the world. The software was the centre of the so-called Dieselgate scandal in 2015, when Volkswagen admitted it had fitted its vehicles with an illegal device designed to manipulate the results of the diesel emissions tests. The movie star Idris Elba has hosted a star-studded virtual concert to mark Africa Day and raise funds to feed the continent's hungry. The MTV Base Africa Day benefit concert at home hosted the continent's top music stars and was streamed on YouTube and Viacom's CBS networks. Idris Elba said he hoped corporations across the continent would contribute to the initiative. A Singapore-flagged cargo ship has lost at least 40 containers in deep water off the coast of Sydney in Australia. The containers fell overboard in heavy seas when the vessel, the APL England, lost propulsion power in a journey from China to Australia. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority spotted some containers and debris in the water, but efforts to recover them were deterred by bad weather and poor visibility. An additional 74 containers were damaged and remained collapsed on the deck of the ship. And finally, remaining in Australia, an Australian filmmaker has captured these slow-motion, time-lapse videos of a dust storm hitting the west of the country as the region experiences its worst weather in a decade. Around 50,000 people were left without power due to storm-related outages, remnants of Cyclone Manga. The wild weather brought down trees and caused wind speeds of up to 130 kilometres per hour in some parts of the region. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Welcome to Sports News. Lyon Football Club President Jean-Michel Aulas has called on French authorities to reconsider their decision to end the football season early. On April the 28th, it was announced the League One and League Two seasons will not resume because of the coronavirus pandemic. That's Sports News. Amarachi, back to you.
And the main news again. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, today released guidelines for elections during COVID-19 pandemic. The commission said it is preparing for elections in Edo and Ondo states. That's News at 10. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Good night. Stay safe.